Nick, thank you for doing this. Thank you for being with us today. So let's start with, how would you define the role of a showrunner?
So it's hard to define the role of a showrunner because the details of a showrunner's role vary from show to show. And it's interesting because showrunner is not a clearly defined role. And if you look in the credits of a show, you'll see people named as the director, writer, EP, hair and makeup, craft service, gaffer, everything. Everybody who's there on the set, has a credit, but you don't see showrunner named in the credits because it's not an official job. The showrunner is just the person who everybody looks to for final creative and managerial decisions. So it's the person who's responsible for both those things. And there's a paradox in that because the creative work that you're doing is at odds with the managerial work. So it's this constant battle inside yourself as you're doing the job. For the creative work, your brain has to get into a flow state. You need to be able to lose track of time, to free associate and daydream and explore all kinds of creative avenues. But the managerial work constantly disrupts that. There's budget problems to be solved, there's calendar problems, there's hiring issues, HR stuff, political stuff, we're dealing with the studio and the network, there's marketing, and all of that is constant, and it's constantly disrupting the creative process. So, being a showrunner is being in a state of constant internal conflict. And even creatively, you're in a perpetual balancing act because just dealing with the creative stuff, you have to be both a perfectionist and a curator. So you want to get everything exactly the way you want it, but at the same time, you have to accept that there's so much that's out of your control, and there's so much that has to be done that you have to delegate and outsource to your writing staff and the department heads and directors, and then be curating ideas and making sure that that everything is part of a unified vision.
So it sounds like it's kind of a mix between like the producer, the writer, and the director.
Yes. And, it is a mix of producer and writer director, the job of showrunner. And some showrunners focus on some aspects and delegate others. And, it really depends on the personal taste and aptitudes and skills of the showrunner. So some showrunners love to sit in post and love to be like really meticulous about that. And some showrunners love to be on set, and they're on set kind of looking over the director's shoulder all the time. And some showrunners don't go to set at all. So it is a role that you can define yourself a little bit as long as you take responsibility for the final product.
Interesting. And what would you say are the elements that are indispensable for a Bible of each show?
To put together a Bible for a show, the indispensable elements are you have to have the characters, the world, the tone, the story engine, and sample episodes if it's an episodic show, where each week is a different story. And then if it's a serialized show, you need a breakdown of the season story and the individual episodes. But most of all, what a Bible needs to do is give the reader a sense of what the show is, what it feels like, and why people are going to want to watch it. So you can break all the rules before that and change things around as long as you give that sense of here's what the show is and here's why people are going to want to watch it. And I've seen Bibles written in really unusual formats. There was a Bible that I really liked a while back. I think the show was about a AI or something, and it was written in first person. Like it was just like, hi, I'm the Bible for this show, and I'm going to tell you about myself. So you can get creative as long as you capture the show.
Do you find that it's helpful to have that in case everyone kind of maybe it veers in the process and you're like, oh no, let's get back to what we originally.
In order to give everybody who's working on the show, particularly the writers room, and the executives who you're basically selling the show to constantly, you do need to have a Bible or something like a Bible that represents a true north for what the show is, so that everybody is kind of rowing in the same direction, and that everybody feels that they are, that they're working toward the same vision.
Yeah, that they're all kind of on the same page, so to speak. Great. Do you think there's an American working model for showrunners that's different than, let's say, the Nordic model? Is there a difference you see?
I think that there's a difference in the traditional American model of show running and show creation and the European or Nordic model. The traditional American network model is designed to produce a massive amount of episodes, right? So the more modern premium and streaming model for American showrunners, for HBO or Netflix or anything like that, that's not as different. And I feel like the Nordic and European models have moved toward the American model, even as the American model has moved toward them. So it's sort of a global and universal thing now. 6 or 8 episodes, a small number of writers, maybe even just one writer for a season. It seems like the American TV industry is kind of taking the best of both worlds. When you say the Nordic model, I'm not sure specifically what the Nordic model is. I mean, I know the European model in general, but is there a specific kind of Nordic?
No, I think they meant the European versus American, and giving the Nordic as a example of that. Do you think it's becoming harder and harder to wow the audiences now?
It is much harder, I think, to amaze TV audiences now, because there's been such an embarrassment of riches over the last 20 years in terms of TV. That's a good thing. It's also the case that, there are just so many shows and so much content that it's hard for anything to penetrate the zeitgeist and to last. And because of the Netflix model of dropping all the episodes at once so people can binge watch, that also means that people aren't necessarily living with a show for as long. They're not living with that story in their life necessarily the way they would be if an episode was coming out every week and they were excited and thinking about it over the week. So it's hard to penetrate people's consciousness and to kind of penetrate the zeitgeist. So even if you do amaze people, it's easy for them to quickly forget how amazed they were because 20 new shows come out the next week. So it feels like stories have become a little bit more ephemeral. TV and certainly movies have become more ephemeral. I don't know that people kind of go back and rewatch shows that came out in the last couple of years as much as they used to go back and rewatch like The Sopranos or The Wire. So, like everything, it's a blessing and a curse for showrunners and creators now. There's more opportunity to get shows made because there's this huge global appetite for content, as it's called. I hate that word, content. But there's less eyeballs per show. So you as a creator are more likely to get the kind of creative reward of making the show, then your show can kind of get lost in the crowd. So I would take that deal. To me, the best part of what we get to do is the creation, the actual making of the show. So it's a good thing.
Yeah, I was good. This isn't actually on there, but I'm just curious because of this kind of double-edged swords with wowing, but mostly with having it then get lost. Do you guys tackle this in terms of obviously creating and trying to find something that's going to spread, but also is there more and more kind of a marketing from the beginning is that factoring in with part of the creating so that it lasts more in the zeitgeist or lasts more in the
we always hope that the work that we create, whether it's TV or something else, is going to last, right? You hope that it's going to last and be seen by people for a long time. And marketing is a big part of that. But more important than that is making something that people want to see and that feels really different than other stuff they're going to see. So I've been very, very fortunate in the two shows that that I've made that have come out so far. Although I think by the time this this interview airs, there may be a Brand New Cherry Flavor may be out as well. But with Channel Zero and the Act, they found their audiences because for whatever reason people responded to them, even though it's an interesting example because the Act was marketed really well. It was marketed like, at least in the United States, there were billboards all over the place and people knew about it. And so they came to it and responded to it. Channel Zero didn't get that much marketing and it still found its audience, So I have faith that if you make something that cuts through the noise a little bit, or even if it only targets, even if it only triggers that response from a niche audience, certain people who it's kind of speaking to, if you do it well, it'll find that audience. And that's, I think, what happened with Channel Zero, which is a cult show. It's an obscure show, but people really responded to it, and it still kind of has an audience. So, material finds its audience if it's strong.
Yeah, Channel Zero definitely, I think pulled through. I mean, broke through. How did you put for the creative team of writers for that show, and how do you usually go about that? And how do you kind of bring? Well, these are kind of two questions. Let's first talk about how you put a team of writers together.
So putting a team of writers together, hiring the writer's room at the beginning of a show is the first kind of make or break decision that you have to do as a showrunner. Those are the people who you're going to depend on, who who are going to kind of be part of your brain and who you're going to really depend on. So in the case of Channel Zero, which was a very low profile show, it was on Sci-Fi Channel. So there's a lot of great writers out there and a lot of experienced working writers who everybody knows who they are, and they're going to get snapped up by HBO or whatever. And so if you want really kind of special writers for a show that nobody kind of knows about, you have to look for the undervalued writers, like undervalued stocks. So look for assistants who've been waiting for their break and have really great writing samples, or some veteran writers who have maybe fallen by the wayside, or feature writers who are trying to break into TV. So just look, playwrights, novelists. It is just kind of expanding the horizon. And then you just meet with them and make sure they seem like collaborative, sociable, kind people, all of whom hopefully bring a different point of view or a different talent, different skill into the writer's room. People whose skills complement each other. So it's like hiring a band. You don't need like 5 awesome guitar players. You only need 1 guitar player, and then one bassist and 1 drummer, 1 singer. So hire people who each have a particular skill. Maybe they can write toward a particular character or a story thread, and then you want probably like 4 or 5 people, like too many voices, and they can start to drown each other out. And then you hope that everybody kind of gets along.
You hope that the band sounds good.
Yeah.
So it doesn't influence so much if it's a specific kind of writing story you're trying to tell. It's more important that they just have well-rounded, or the skill you're looking for in general working. It doesn't have to be like, oh, this is going to be a very, specific, this genre. So it'd be good they have that experience, or.
when you're hiring writers for a genre show and a horror show, it's good to have people who are, really well versed in the genre, and then people who aren't. Like, you don't, like I say, you don't want, 5 bassists in the band. You want somebody who has like an encyclopedic knowledge of horror, and maybe a couple people like that. But you also want, somebody who's maybe leans a little bit more toward comedy, or somebody who you really want somebody who's great at character drama, and somebody who's great at dialogue. And you definitely don't want the concentration to be all, straight horror people, like with only that experience. You really want different flavors.
Mm-hmm. You want to mix it up. What's the writing process for you like?
So my writing process before I get into the writer's room is pretty straightforward. There's variations with each project, but there's a couple of stages. The first stage is conceptualizing, which is just getting the idea. That's daydreaming, walking around, going swimming, doing dishes, just kind of thinking and putting down scraps of an idea that can be sort of all over the place until they start to form a bigger picture. And then, it's like sentences, paragraphs. I might even like draw pictures and gradually kind of see all the possibilities taking shape. And that's the dreaming stage. That's conceptualizing. Then there's outlining. That's the organization stage. Take what I've got from the earlier stage and put it into like a really skeletal outline where there's just a couple of bullet points. Each one is an act, like one act, whether it's a 5-act structure or a 3-act structure. And then I take each act and break that down into more bullet points. Each bullet point is a scene or a location. And then I take each one of those scenes and break that down into individual story beats, like just the emotional and informational beats that happen in that scene. And then I try and communicate that in the actual script so that the director understands like what those specific story beats are that they have to capture. That's the second stage. And the third stage is writing. Let's just take that and write it. And then the fourth stage is rewriting. And before I sit down to write, or before I sit down to begin the process, I always just remind myself of those steps to make sure I'm not jumping ahead. Because if I'm outlining before I'm finished conceptualizing, or writing before I'm really finished outlining, at some point, like my brain's gonna go like chunk, and like, I'll know I didn't do all the work to get where I need to go.
Oh, interesting. So if it's not laid out in that kind of way, it'll come back to bite you, because it's a method that needs to be done in your case, or most cases probably.
Yes. And things can change, for sure. Like once I'm writing, the outline will change, but I need to have a fully thought out roadmap, or it'll just feel like I haven't honored the idea, like I haven't fully explored it and made sure that it works before changing it.
How much of a rewrite are we talking? Like when you have rewrites?
Man, well, I hate rewriting. I really hate rewriting. It's the most arduous part of the process for me. So, how long does it take to rewrite? It takes forever until I'm forced to stop. So the rewriting process, if the show is actually being made, coincides with the production process and all the managerial stuff that goes on. So I'll be writing on set. I'll be rewriting in the editing room. It really doesn't ever end.
Wow. And this kind of goes back to the Bible question, what you were saying, having spaced out that, like, how many seasons do you have it all written out? Or
when you're putting together a Bible for a show, usually I'll have the first season broken out in a lot of detail, in like the individual episodes. And then I'll have later seasons and it'll just be like a page or half a page or a paragraph. And it'll just be like a general story area saying like, and then in season 2, we might do this. But most of my shows, all the shows that have been made are either limited series or anthologies. So the story doesn't continue from one season to the next. So I've never really had to break out, a story that goes on for 4 or 5 seasons. In the case of an anthology where you're doing the Bible like that, it'll break out the first season in detail, like we did this with Channel Zero, and then it'll just be like a page or half a page that says, and in season 2, we might do a story like this.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. We assume that there are many things that are released that are not used and other things that are, until you get what serves to dramatically score what was happening. Are there many discards?
So when you're making a show, shooting a show, there is so much material that goes by the wayside. And it's maddening because you get to the end and you're like, man, if we had only known that we wouldn't need that or that wouldn't work, we could have saved so much time, we could have saved so much money. But unfortunately, it is, at least so far for me, it's just part of the process that you figure out as you're writing and shooting that this thing you thought you really needed, and that you thought was really cool, either just isn't necessary or is kind of actively distracting or detrimental from or to the whole. So editing in particular, but also writing is like really constantly a process of killing darlings. And there will frequently be scenes where, it's like a long character scene of 2 characters talking, and like the first half of the scene is kind of preamble, and then the second half is like the meat of the scene. And, I'm kind of thinking to myself, well, we'll probably end up cutting the first half of the scene. And then we see it in the editing and I'm like watching, I'm like, God, the subtext in the first half of the scene is what really works. We end up cutting the second half of the scene, which I thought was the scene. And then it's the first half of the scene where there's like some undercurrent that stays in the show. Or so it always surprises me what lives and what dies. Is really like a constant process of learning.
That's fascinating. It's almost like the between the lines. When you're editing, you see that actually it's enough, or that it's said enough that of what you were then putting, more hammering with dialogue or whatever in terms of action.
When you're deciding what to keep and what to discard in a show, in the writing and the editing process, once you're in editing, it's been transformed because the actors have made it their own. So the actors can bring stuff to a scene that, you may have hoped for, or you may have never imagined. And you realize that what you thought was the important part doesn't even need to be said because they were expressing it non-verbally or just embodying it before that.
That must be really cool to watch.
Yeah, it's both really cool and maddening sometimes, because you're like, oh man, I wish I had known.
What are the main challenges when creating a new show, and do these vary according to each platform, like the Netflix model, HBO?
It's kind of impossible to say definitively what are the main challenges when creating a new show, because it's such a big question that there's no clear answer to it. Like everything is a huge challenge. Every show has its specific challenges. It might be on one show like, well, the show is set in this city, but we can only shoot it in this other city that looks nothing like it. So every single day you're trying to figure out how to make that work. or, some budget issue, or some cast members don't get along, or the network, it turns out, thinks they're making a different show. That's never really happened to me, but I've heard it happen. I've seen it happen and heard it happen to so many showrunners where, it's just a kind of a constant struggle to make the thing that you thought you were setting out to make. Creatively, I think the main challenges that are universal are you have to conceive of a world, you have to build a world that has to live and support itself for a long time. Logistically, the biggest challenge when creating a new show, the first huge challenge is you have to sell the show. You have to go out and be a business person and a pitch person. And that is kind of, it's not a skill that's natural to most writers. Then once, if they give you permission to make your show and see your vision through, you have to hire the right writers. If you don't do that, you're screwed from the beginning. And then you have to, you presumably created the pilot and spent a lot of time thinking about that and took a long time. And then when they say go, you have to do an entire season. So 7, 8, 10, whatever episodes in the amount of time that you spent, writing, conceiving a single episode. So it's this sort of whiplash feeling. And even if you've done it before, the challenges, there will always be something that surprises you. There's always some challenge that you didn't anticipate. And you're like, how are we going to do this? So I would say that the main consistent challenge when creating a new show and show running is staying calm throughout what will feel like constant crises, and maintaining your creative flow despite the constant logistical challenges that'll come up.
Mm-hmm. What for you has been the most rewarding in terms of seeing your characters to come to life?
In terms of characters from my own shows, the character that's been most rewarding to bring to life is probably a tie between Pretzel Jack in The Dream Door, Channel Zero, The Dream Door, who's just such a lovable character who really means well and wants to protect his friend and does it by, horrific murders, but really just wants to hug and be hugged. And Margot, Margot Slater, the lead character in Channel Zero, No End House. So because that story about letting go of loss and coming to terms with the loss of parent was really powerful for me and personal, and I was just really happy with how Amy Forsyth played the character, and how that season came together. How Stephen Pyatt directed that season, but really, every season of TV that I've made has been really rewarding, and all the characters in them, kind of stick with you, and it's just, it's a privilege to get to do it.
Well, they come from you.
Yeah, they come from a lot of people. It's exciting to see everybody's work come together in different ways and see what actors do with the characters who come out of the writer's room.
Mm-hmm. The following question was, do the characters evolve with the seasons? Obviously they do, but maybe expand on that.
Well, in the shows that I've done, the characters don't really have, there are no characters who carry over from season to season, because everything is a self-contained season. So I would love the opportunity to do an ongoing series at some point. I just, haven't yet because of the the stories that I've chosen to tell and the shows that have been greenlit. I would love the kind of creative runway that offers. At the same time, there's something very rewarding about being able to explore new worlds with every season of TV.
Yeah, because also when there seems to be more, there's, you know, subsequent seasons, you know, you have maybe evolution of the character based on maybe what the fans have reacted to or what the actual actors have.
Well, yeah, I think when you make shows that go for a number of years and that evolve over seasons, I think the characters have to evolve, right? Like they have to, of course they have to evolve, but they have to evolve in ways that you didn't anticipate. And that's going to be, I think, probably first and foremost a function of the actor who's playing that character and making the character their own. You're going to learn things about the character that you never would have anticipated. They're going to take the shape of that actor a little bit, even as the actor takes the shape of the character. And you're also going to see what people respond to. So that's something that, you know, you can do in TV that you can't do in film or really any other medium.
What, and this doesn't have to be necessarily your shows, but what current or past shows have been the most interesting to you, and kind of for what reason? I mean, that's a huge question, but if you want.
In terms of current shows that I love, there's a lot, but one show that particularly stuck with me recently was Losing Alice, the Israeli show. I think it's all written and directed by the same filmmaker, Sigal Levine, and if I'm saying that right, just an incredibly effective psychological thriller, character story, complex, creates tension out of scenes that I've never seen before, and it's a meta story that a filmmaker, you know, trying to make a film with her husband in it, and her relationship with the screenwriter, and this kind of complicated triangle between them, and it manages to get tension and suspense and dread out of like a locations meeting, or just like the most kind of mundane things that would seem almost impossible to create that kind of drama out of. And it's also incredibly well filmed and directed, that the characters both feel real and kind of like spookily heightened. It's really sexy. It's really surprising. That was the thing I watched a couple months ago, and it stuck with me.
Oh, wow. I have to check this one out. I haven't seen it. That sounds amazing. What do you foresee the evolution of the figure of the showrunner with the greatest weight of the platforms and audiovisual consumption and all this kind of, I mean, what do you think is going to happen? Or how do you think it's going to change? Or, I mean, it's changing so fast, but give it a shot.
I think as the TV industry evolves, the definition of showrunner is going to become even murkier. You know, you see it now with Marvel shows where they don't even name a showrunner. There is no showrunner. There's a head writer and a director, and it's unclear kind of from the outside who's doing what. So, you know, I think that when you have a longer series, you need a writer as the showrunner, because there's so much story. You know, you need somebody who has an overview of the story, kind of holding things together. When you have a show that's 6 episodes or something like that, you know, it's harder to argue. Like, really, it goes back to, you know, the question that we were talking about before, like, what is the definition of the showrunner? And it's really, you know, it's complicated, but it's also simple. The showrunner is the person who runs the show. It's the person who everybody goes to for answers. So, you know, if you have a director directing every episode and they are taking creative ownership of the show, then they're the showrunner. So it really is whose creative vision is driving the show.
Yeah, it's pretty simple in a way. Well, thank you, Nick.
Thank you.